How is everyone today? Yeah, काफी ठंडा group है यार ये. I think you guys have been loaded with presentations, maybe nice food in the afternoon, थोड़ा सा sweet. So before I get going, I asked a very beautiful presenter today, the host, कितना time है मेरे पास? And I'm hoping everyone is from Bombay here. No? How many of you all took a flight to come here? Okay. So whatever I'm going to talk to you guys about is going to be very relevant because you had to get on a plane and come here. And the topic that I'm going to talk about is leveraging Concur in our enterprise place. But before I do that, let me just finish that line, which is, when I got up here, I asked her, how much time do I really have? And she said, you got around 25, 30 minutes. And then I said, okay, 25, 30 minutes is a good time for me to catch up with this fantastic group, talk about my experiences. But better is, I don't really have any presentation. So whatever I say is going to be on the fly. If I speak something which is not accurate or correct, you will never be able to catch me because there is nothing on there. You can't take pictures. And I don't think this is getting recorded. So it's all between us now. All right. So let me share with you a little bit about LTI, if you will. And then thereafter, I would love to talk to you about what we did in the travel and expense space, if you will, around driving some of the business transformations. And if you have any questions thereafter, I would be very happy to take those as well. So when we talk about LTI, LTI as an organization has been around for the last 20 years. And the genesis of this is, Larsen Toubro, as an organization, went down the path of implementing SAP, being one of the first pioneering organizations that adopted technology, and in this case SAP, in those time frame. It essentially required folks to be carved out from their day-to-day business and bring them into this phenomenally advanced function called IT. And retaining these folks after they implement SAP, which I'm assuming everyone knows, is very difficult. And so they said, for the mechanical type of people that they are there, the labor people and the mechanical guys that really work in the engineering space that are there, they have a very different set of demands and requirements versus the guys who are in IT. And so they carved out this new organization called Larsen Toubro Infotech. And I belong to that family. Okay? So that's a little genesis about LTI. It's a 24,000 employee-based organization, spans across 56 countries. It has been in media for a while for a lot of good reasons. And I take enormous pride. And so when I joined LTI, which is around 6 quarters back, hopefully closing 7, one of the things that really came to me was drive what is called exponential transformation. And as an organization which has been there for a while, and for many of the type of business that we are in, it's essentially about taking people from where we are and in some cases taking them closer to the customer, because that's the service model we are in. And one of the biggest pet peeve that we heard was, it just takes a second job for someone to really move through the several steps and processes, which are then shackled by a very fantastic document called policy. Thereafter, going through the range of structures of enterprise, getting the right approval. And hopefully, after all of that is done, you just hope that nothing really goes wrong as you complete the travel, you reach the destination, and then you get to your job. And I think till that point in time, everything, if it comes out the way you anticipate, I think it's great. But then you are always going to be up against another round of big challenge, which is, how do you reimburse this travel? And that process just keeps going on and on and on. And I wish if time travel were to come true, we wouldn't really need Concur, but we are not there yet, so we'll have to bear with it. So anyway, so that was the little story about what LTI was at. That was a challenge in front of us, people moving back and forth. Just like I'm assuming for some of y'all, where organizations have been mushroomed in many spades, enterprise applications have kind of evolved over a period of time, and it has tried to catch up with the changing nature of the business around the cost elements, and as the company grows, you need to have platforms which are scalable in times, and then the requirements of the business keep evolving and changing as well. So how do you really make this thing work? And so that was the problem statement that came to us. And they said, even if you could just have a robust platform that will survive the test of times and can get people from point A to point B in a seamless way, that would be phenomenal. And that's how exactly the project started. Now let me tell you a little story about what really went before we, in fact, even engaged with Concur team. So it started very simply. We have a homegrown system. It works. It works. People do travel. But it's at a point where people don't want to travel. It's like, yes, customer, can I come day after tomorrow? Because our system ko thoda time lag jayega. Or, you know what, before we can get to travel, I need to go through this 5 different set of processes. And God forbid if it's an international travel, you also need to go ahead and get this visa, your immigration, make sure those documents are in place. Hopefully you'll end up for the visa at the right point in time, and you'll get the visa. And if you do, then you have to go back and convince your family and give them the details. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And so when that problem statement came, we started looking at design thinking as a channel for understanding what is it that the end user really goes through. And that gave us a different insight. That insight was far more human in nature than just systems. That insight was slightly different than looking at saying, okay, I need to give this guy a ticket, make sure that he goes only from point A to point B, and then when he comes for reimbursement, he's going to get mandated by policies. Everything else, I'm going to make sure it is too confusing for him so that he can never ask for reimbursement and he gets caught up in this approval cycle. So we went away from that type of a model to exactly what is it that's going to be meaningful to the user. So when we engaged with the Concur team through that evolution cycle, which I think was a very swift cycle, around 2.5 weeks, we went in, asked them what is it that they can bring to the table and enable us with, and the conversations were directly on the spot. We are here because we want to transform the travel experience. We also want to make sure that when you start leveraging this platform, you can see the cost benefit on day 0. And by the way, when you do this, you don't really need an army of IT people to keep coding. And I think those were all the sweet things that we started hearing about. And we really liked that story, and so we said, let's go ahead and plunge into it. And so I think it was closer around January of this year, which was December 31st is when we signed all contracts with SAP, I think. I'm assuming all of you do the same thing because it's an year end. And so we got that real nice transactions behind us. 2nd of January, when the world resumes, we went and had this first meeting, which was out there in Bangalore. And 16 days from then, we were live. I'm going to take a moment here because that's exactly what happened. That's it. Everything else from that point onwards is, yeah, it's c'est la vie. It just works. You know, I don't really remember having any escalations after we went live. I don't think anyone knocked my door and said, "Arey yaar, ye ticket nahi hai mere paas, how do I travel?" Because we do frequent travel. And no one really complained about the expense part. So I think that's a testament of what we have done. But let me now get into the next layer as to what really happened and how it really ended up coming the way it did. So with our friends from Concur and from the guys in LTI, we essentially went with what we call, we will just leverage the platform in the shape and format it does come. But that's a real tough story to sell to the internal travel team. It's a tough story to tell to your business community because they've been used to working in a certain way. There is a process in place, and then to that process there is a set of policies, and to that set of policies there is practices, and to that practices there is culture, and to that culture there is expectations. And so that's a tall order. That's a tall order of things that had to be put in place. And 2 weeks is not sufficient. I'm pretty sure it's not. But what we did was slightly different. With the mindset that we walked in saying that, you know what, we got to change. We got to change. And in this case, it's about, I'll use the Hindi slang here. It's like, agar ghar ke bulb badal rahe ho, to sare badal dalo ek hi din mein. You know, don't wait. Why? Because our systems, our processes, our practices are so intertwined that if you start changing them one at a time, by the time you get to the last one, the first one has already blown out. So you'll have to go back to the first one and start screwing in again. It's not going to work. And even if it were to be made to work, the visible value of what you ought to deliver will probably get diluted. So speed was the essence, and that was the only mantra we really put in front of us, which was the number one. We get to speed, and it started with understanding the product and the tool, getting to signing of the contract, if you will, if you can say that, but then really getting into kickstarting the project. And in that 16-week cycle, we really made it happen. That was the first element. The second element was to really look at, yes, there are a set of policies and practices, but how many of these policies are written at least 6 months ago? And how many of them are written a year ago? And how many of them were written prior to that? And so everything that was written prior to that essentially became history for us, period. We are not going to take a look at that. Every single line of policy which was out there had to have a number range to it, right? That's the activity that we did, because travel policies are, they can get you, believe me. Those are loaded documents. And more than those loaded documents, sometimes it is the unspoken and the unwritten stuff that really comes into your way. So taking a list of that, looking at it and saying, what is the process? No. Let's not talk about process. Why is it there? Let's first start talking about that, right? And in our line of business, especially in IT services, and in many of you all as well, if the manager gets a travel request, the first thing that happens is, yes, I'm going to look at that. What period is he really traveling for, and what location he's traveling for? And thereafter, once you are convinced that, yes, that's the right thing from a process perspective, the second step that comes in is, here's his accommodation request. And then after the accommodation request, there is another request that says he's going for a team event, so there is a dinner event plan for which he's going to ask in advance whether he can spend that amount. So that's a third request. And then, of course, he's going to rent a car or something, fourth request. And then he needs a 4X, fifth request. And then he needs insurance. You just have to make sure that, yes, he's eligible, so 7. And the list keeps going on and on and on. And what we did is, that was the policy. That was the process as well. And we looked at that and said, no. We're not going to do that for sure. We are going to instead turn that around. So when we started looking at it, we start scrapping all of these requests that comes in, and instead said, if the person is going to travel and the manager is convinced, of course, we're not going to put him out on the street to live. He has to have a hotel. So why is the manager ever going to require an approval for that? It is implied that if he's traveling out of town, he has to stay, as long as the tool is configured in a way that allows us to put this guy in a safe accommodation within the limits of which we want him to stay. That's good enough. And if there is any type of fluctuations of rate, that will be taken care, not as an approval, but as a business management decision. And thereafter, every single line of approval that we had in place kind of got knocked out. Every one of them. The only one that was there was a travel request. But that's a tough one, because in today's day and age, if you want to really get the best deal from an airfare perspective, I think that only comes when you book in advance. Unfortunately, in our business life, we don't really have a crystal ball to gaze and see where we are going to be 2 weeks from now, because our businesses are dynamic. And so much of our travel, irrespective of desire, intended or unintended, it happens at the last minute. So how do you really avail that cost benefit, if you will? Does it even exist? And those were the type of questions we wrestled around with. And what we did is, we soon realized that the cycle time for a manager to approve is causing a significant delay to achieve this objective. It truly is. Because getting an approval is a matter of a second job. But getting the manager to sit there, review it, and then make sure that he makes a decision is important. And all of that kind of just adds up to the delay time. So long and behold, what we essentially did is we said, we are going to start looking at the second layer of information stack. For all domestic travels, let's just get away from all these approvals, because even if the person travels and if the manager gets notified, that's good enough. For international travel, which is point to point, let the user essentially get to do the booking. Of course, if there's a cancellation at zero cost, we will avail that process, and so we did that as well. But more than anything else, I think what really, changed the mindset from a travel perspective was the experience of really booking tickets the way an individual does in his personal life. If you ask anyone, is traveling a challenge, especially the ticketing part? I don't think it is, because if you go to Make My Trip and if you go to the Go Ibibos and the Trivagos of the world, it's a seamless experience. There are 4 fields. You punch in the details, remove your credit card if it's not already saved in the wallet, and voila, you are done. But when you go to your business travel systems, usually there are like these 16 plus fields. And there's a cost code or a WBS element, which no one really understands what it is. And then before you can even go to do a travel thing, the first field that comes to you is the pot. Not the pot that you usually drink, by the way. It's a pot for purpose of travel. Right? I mean, it is so different. The consumer experience is so different. And those are the type of things that we wrestled around with and said, how do we get away from that? And how do you really simplify that? And there were elements that Concur as a platform helped us enable as well as disposition. The second part of the story, outside of speed and simplicity, if you will, was around the reimbursement simplification. And I think that has been an amazing experience for us because, for this 24,000 employee base who are continuously going in and doing this travel, spending money and requesting for claims and reimbursement, you can only imagine what the world really is like, if you will, from the guys who service this type of request from a back office. Reams of documents that comes to you. And many times by the time those even receipts come to them, the ink has faded away. So you don't really know what this expense is for. And then when a person is requesting for some of these claims, they are in some different geolocations. And you call that guy after 2-week cycle and say, hey, Mr. Sales Guy, I don't think I really understand what this expense is for. And the guy just says, what part you don't understand? And you really want me to track all of these expenses because I got like 300 of these receipts, and by the way, there are other 300 which I've not even claimed, so I can't help you. I know that this is a legit expense. I had given it to you in an envelope, just make that happen. And that's just a bewildering experience. And it's not by design or by intent that the person in the back office wanted to delay the reimbursement. I mean, he does not have any vested interest to do that. But it is just that the system, the platform, and the process that are out there were not supporting enough for him or her to do the job in the most accelerated way. And so when we talked about Concur and we extended the expense reimbursement platform in this area, it was an amazing experience for the very simple reason that we went away from being a paper-driven culture to a paperless culture. And of course, when you do that, when you take that plunge, the first person who is going to jump out of his cabin and is going to chase you down is going to be your CFO. He's going to say, "Mat karo." And you ask why, and he says, you know what, people are going to put in duplicate receipts. You don't have the intelligence. The people in the back office are too tired. Yeah, all of that is true. And then once you can sort those issues out with your CFO, the next person who walks in is the tax guy. And he comes in and says, you know what, Indian law does not allow you to do any type of reimbursement unless you have the paper ticket, or the receipts, by the way. And so you go into this legal stuff and you start looking at all these laws. By the time you get through that, you quite understand that aisa kuch nahi hai. What is out there is pretty much shades of gray. And I can get to every line of looning, by the way. By the way, in my job as a CIO, I have done many other roles as well, and I've acquired much of the skills. So I can be a legal advisor to any of you if you would like, zero cost. But yes, there's nothing like that as well. So we did all of that. And we went back and we had a really interesting discussions with every single business stakeholder which was carrying this set of information that it can be done, to a point that saying, you know what, we are going to go behind it and we are going to help you do it. And so we went to paperless, we trained our back office, cut them into a scale which essentially got them into half, if you will. Not resizing it, but just reclassifying it. So half of those folks that were really doing this reimbursement essentially ended up being the processing team, and the other ones that were out there, they ended up being the analytical team. So these are the guys who are now mining the data to feed back into the system saying, what is it that we need to do so that we provide a better experience? We really end up stopping a lot of leakages. Look at information in a slightly different way so that it can craft out better deals with our vendors and stuff like that. Yeah? So that's the little story about our travel and expense. I thought I'll juice it up in many ways, but I think it is a topic that I feel comes near and dear to anyone in IT, especially who is doing a back office type of work. And if you guys are looking for a platform, I vouch this. I vouch this from a very simple reason that the platform in itself gives you the ability to quickly implement. As long as you have the financial set of metrics and data with you, I think it's plug and play. There are things that the platform does not do as well, so it's not like everything that you want can be done. But that kind of begs the question, what do you really want? You want a perfect solution 3 months from now, or you want something relatively sooner so that you can get the house in order, show the value back to your stakeholders and to your users, and get something going and then perfect it in due time. And I think those are the type of questions at a leadership level you might want to mingle around and get an answer to. And if you do that, I think it's a good platform. That's my speech, guys.